All right, so welcome. A few disclaimers. This group session is intended to provide information and support related to mental health wellness. Any information or advice offered during this session is not considered a professional clinical diagnosis. If you need professional clinical support, please be sure to reach out to your primary care provider or other mental health resources in your area. Some of our ground rules include try to be respectful to each other, try not to interrupt, and remember that everyone's opinion matters. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. What is trauma? Trauma is defined as a powerful emotional response to a distressing event or series of events that are physically or emotionally threatening. A couple of important things to remember about trauma. Trauma is personal. Different things are traumatic to different people. It's not our place, my place, anyone else's place to tell someone what should be traumatic to them, or how they should respond to that trauma. There are no rules about what is or what is not traumatic. Other people can't know how you feel about your own experience or if they are traumatic for you. You might have similar experiences to someone else, but be impacted in a different way or for a longer amount of time. So the key phrase is trauma is personal. Trauma can include any events where you feel frightened, under threat, humiliated, rejected, abandoned, invalidated, unsafe, unsupported. I'm sorry, that went the wrong way. Or unsafe. How trauma happens. Trauma can happen with one off or ongoing events, being directly harmed or neglected, witnessing harm to someone else, living in a traumatic atmosphere or an environment, being affected by trauma in a family or community, including trauma that has happened before you were born. Groups more likely to experience trauma include people from racialized communities, basically communities that based on race have been divided or marginalized, people who are serving or have served in the military, individuals with past or present involvement with prison, refugees, people within the LGBTQ plus community, and individuals experiencing poverty. There are different types of trauma. There is childhood trauma, where the experiences of an event by a child, event or events by a child that is emotionally painful or distressful, which often results in lasting mental and physical effects. There's collective trauma, which is a traumatic experience that affects and involves entire groups of people, communities, or societies. I want to back up real quick. I forgot to mention the significance of childhood trauma upon a person's life um, determines basically their lifestyle and their behaviors and choices moving into adulthood. Um, Again, the mental and physical effects can be long standing and often are. And typically, the more childhood traumas you experience, the more complex and chronic your trauma responses can be. There is actually a scale that we use called ACE, which stands for adverse childhood experiences, and it's a scale where you go through and you determine how many traumas children have experienced. You're talking to them as an adult, but you're going over things they may have experienced, like abuse, neglect, domestic violence, substance use or mental health concerns in the household, sexual assault, and things like that. And the higher your number of ACEs, the more likely you're to have negative, complex, and chronic impacts on your daily functioning. and your physical health. So, just to give you an idea, 64% of Americans have experienced at least one ACE um, event in their lifetime, and 1 out of 6 Americans have experienced at least four. So it's I don't want to use the word normal, but it's common that people have experienced ACE events, and ACE events tend to explain the ways people think, process, behave within relationships as well as their physical health. So collective trauma is a traumatic experience that affects and involves entire groups of people, communities, or societies. A good example that we can all relate to at this point for collective trauma would be COVID, because it impacted the entire world. Um, it's not uncommon for collective trauma to be something that actually changes the way we operate as a
Okay.
society or
Mm-hmm.
community. And and as you can see, we're still struggling with the trauma that COVID has caused to the world by just some of the ways that we go about our daily lives today. Generational trauma is experienced across generations of family, a culture, or a group. Some examples of generational trauma include slavery, the Holocaust experiences, anything that impacts a large group of people, but and still has impacts to this day. So, um, you know, African Americans are still experiencing the impacts of slavery today within our environment, um, as well as the residual, racism and discrimination, um, that it as exists regarding this trauma. Some people believe that the reason why generational trauma continues to impact people, you know, in the present day is that our DNA is impacted and actually changed as a result of the trauma. Other people believe it's because of the environmental factors that still exist resulting from the trauma. Secondary trauma is when you witness trauma or you're closely connected to the trauma, but you do not experience it directly. Some examples of people who may experience secondary trauma would include um, nurses, um, emergency medical professionals, teachers, policemen, firefighters, things like that, who come in contact with multiple, and frequent high trauma events. So reactions to trauma when it is experienced immediately, like so, you know, during the trauma or immediately following the trauma event, you can experience any combination of these symptoms: panic, exhaustion, confusion, sadness, anxiety, numbness, difficulty eating or sleeping, body pain, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, elevated heart rate, and excessive sweating. There's, like again, there's no rules to trauma. So you could experience things outside of this list. It's not a complete and total list. And you can experience them in any combination and at any time throughout your trauma event and after your trauma event. Does anyone have any questions or comments so far? Okay. So reactions to trauma that can extend past the actual trauma event include re experiencing the trauma. Now, that looks like having thoughts or feelings or memories and other triggers that cause uncomfortable feelings like anger, fear, or sadness. So, that can include nightmares, flashbacks, and physical responses like pain, physical pain in your stomach, in your head, in your body, in your back. Um, um, you know, any number of responses that kind of resurface continuously whenever you're exposed to a trigger. Another reaction is avoidance of trauma reminders. So, an avoidance of anything related to the trauma in an effort to control the trauma reaction. So, in an effort not to experience the feelings of sadness and anger or fear. Um, some ways that avoidance is practiced is through drug and alcohol use, avoidance of people, places, and things, and conversations related to the trauma, or suppressing the thoughts related to the trauma. Another reaction to trauma are negative thoughts and feelings. These thoughts and feelings may begin or worsen after the initial trauma experience, and at times can seem to be not related directly to the trauma experience. So sometimes people will not, things will happen a year later, and they don't necessarily relate them to the trauma, but it's common that they are. So that would include excessive blame towards oneself or other people related to the trauma event, feelings of isolation or disconnection from their surroundings. Some people have referred to that as kind of like feeling like they're watching a movie, like it's not happening to them, they're outside of it, or feeling isolated from just their family and friends in the world in general. Difficulty expressing positive feelings, loss of memories related to the trauma, which can also be an avoidance tactic in regards to the trauma, and negative thoughts about themselves or just the world in general. Um, a lot of people, once they experience a significant trauma, tend to kind of lose faith in the world or humankind or other people, trust in other people, and things like that. So these negative thoughts and feelings related to the trauma are common. All of these reactions are common. And again, they don't necessarily go in any order. They can come and go, um, you know, like a wave, basically. It could be
I have,
worse. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I have a question. So, um, reaction to trauma, you said loss of memory related to the trauma. So, some people can actually completely forget the event, or are you saying that just some pieces of it people may not have memory of?
It could be either one of those or any combination of those. So they can block out the entire event. They can block out parts of the event. They can block out, and I wouldn't necessarily call this blackout, but they can confuse the timeline of the events. That's particularly common with children. So children, which is why it's kind of difficult. The younger the child it is, it's kind of difficult to get. It can be, I should say, difficult to get or correct, excuse me, accurate is the word I was looking for, an accurate timeline of the events because the memories kind of merge together, and it could be, and especially if we're talking about childhood trauma that occurred over time, they might, the concept of time is difficult for them to grasp. So they could forget certain parts and leave out certain parts and add certain parts. Um, but to, directly answer your question, it could be the entire event or certain parts of the event.
Could I add something to that?
Please.
Is that sometimes that loss of memory can be something that's happening unconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as you know, people, we have something called defense mechanisms, and we
Exactly.
often hear that term. I don't know if that's coming up later, Nikki, in your sharing, but sometimes our body reacts in a way to defend or protect itself, and that's the way our brain is also what do you call it? The way our brain is kind of programmed to
Mm-hmm.
do that as a way to protect itself. Part of a kind of like a fight or flight response, something that happens naturally and organically, not necessarily intentionally or subconsciously.
Most definitely. Thank you. And I did not go any further into that. So thank you for um, adding that extra, information. It definitely is a defense mechanism, an avoidance mechanism to protect ourselves from things that our brain determines are, overwhelming or hard for us to process or handle. So thank you for adding that. Hyperarousal is another reaction to trauma. It's a reactivity or a feeling of being on edge at all times, which can include a broad range of physical and psychological symptoms. Some of those include heightened startle response or reaction, where, if you ever met someone who you walk in a room and they're like, oh, they're always like jumpy or on edge or easily scared, that could be a trauma response. Irritability, anger, and or aggression, difficulty concentrating or focusing on daily activities or just daily engagement with others, frequently scanning the environment for danger or trauma reminders, and risky or impulsive behaviors. Risky and impulsive behaviors are a common response to trauma. As a clinician, one of the first things that I would assess if someone comes in with issues with risky behaviors and impulse control, hypersexual, um, heavy drug use, um, extreme aggression and violence, um, fast driving, just making decisions that can put themselves in harm's way, is to do a trauma assessment, because it's so linked to those behaviors that typically there is some sort of trauma behind it. So, in regards to healing trauma responses are natural. Give yourself permission to experience and process what you are feeling. Remember, there is no timeline for healing. Talk to someone or seek professional help. There are several professional or therapy models that directly address trauma. Trauma informed therapy is one of them. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. For those who joined us in other sessions, you know that when I say cognitive, I'm speaking about the way our brain, our thoughts, and our emotions impact our actions. So CBT is going to address directly, those trauma thoughts, those trauma feelings, and how we're feeling, and then how we behave based on those things, and provide strategies to kind of help us interrupt that cycle. And then, as well as talking to your natural supports, your friends and your family, and that can include group therapy or group meetings with people who have experienced the same trauma. Try not to suppress your feelings or block them out. Gradually confront your feelings to reduce the risk of the trauma responses controlling your life. Avoid making major life decisions or big life changes until you feel better. And avoid using drugs and or alcohol as an avoidance um, method or a way to cope. And then prioritize your self-care. Make sure you're getting enough sleep. Make sure you're eating well. Make sure you're focusing on things that make you feel good. Make sure you're staying connected to your family and friends and your community. All right. Does anyone have anything that they would like to add or share or express about any trauma they have experienced or any trauma responses they may be able to identify?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it okay, or should a person ask somebody else this information? Say, I have this information about trauma, and could you possibly be suffering from trauma still by these actions? Would that be okay for me to say to somebody else?
It would definitely depend on your relationship with that person. And other things like, have they shared their experiences from you in the past with you in the past? Um, what their comfort level is, what type of trauma response you're seeing. Um, so like, give me a little bit more information. Is this someone you know? It's a family member?
Yes, it's a family member, and they are in therapy right now. And I could say talk to your therapist about this, or maybe this is a good question you should ask your therapist. Would that be okay?
That
Just
would
a
be okay
question.
as well. And then you could also just
Okay.
say, hey, do you want to talk about it? Do you feel okay talking about it? And give them permission to say no. It's okay if you say no. But I would love to. I just saw something about trauma and I wanted to share it with you. So it's okay to ask people if they want our support in a particular way. I just think it's important for them to understand that it's okay if they don't share. I'm not going to take it personal if you don't share. But I thought this would be helpful to you.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Does anyone else have anything they would like to share?
I'll quickly
Looking at
share the reason I asked that question before,
Mm-hmm.
because I have a friend that told me, we recently spoke about her having told me that she had cancer many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, let's say. And but I don't remember us ever having that conversation. She said that she told me she had cancer and that my response was really big. Like I had to get off the phone. I couldn't talk about it. I don't remember that at all. So it was like recently we were talking about how she had cancer before, and had chemo or whatever it was that she did that, removed the cancer. And me saying to her, you shouldn't have gone through that alone. You should have told me. She said, I did tell you. You were the first person I told. And your response was, this. And I was just like, I don't have any memory of that. And so that's why I asked, with the when I saw that it said, trauma where you can lose memory of it, how that actually worked. Because I just thought that was great. It blew my mind when she told me that I was the first person that she told, and I don't even remember that conversation or that event at all.
Yeah, it is definitely a case of our brain just saying, I can't handle that. It's too much. And so it is one of the defense mechanisms, like it was said earlier, that we don't even necessarily have to be aware of. And sometimes it does take a trigger or a conversation for us to remember. And it sounds like in your case, even with the conversation, you still didn't recall it. Correct?
I don't know if that's my phone or yours. I missed the ending of what you said. What was the question you asked?
Well, I was saying that sometimes with repressed memories, when our brain automatically represses memories um, in response to trauma, sometimes it'll take a trigger or a conversation to bring that trauma, to light or to remembrance. But in your case, it sounds like even the conversation didn't trigger the memory.
Yeah, no, it didn't trigger me at all. I don't remember that event
Mm-hmm.
at all.
Yeah, it is definitely can be categorized as a flight or fight response, with that being a flight response. Okay, so I did have something that I wanted to share that I recently experienced with a client of mine, and I thought it was important to bring it up because I feel that more of us than we either recognize or are willing or ready to acknowledge may be exhibiting behaviors that could be trauma responses from our past. So the example, the client of a client of mine was that she had recently brought a new car, a new truck actually, and it's significant that it was a truck. So she brought a new truck, and she was, excited about the truck and talking about it. She had been talking about it for a couple of sessions. She was shopping for the truck, and so when she came to our session that day, she asked me, did I want to see her truck? Of course. So let's go celebrate your truck. So we go outside, we look at the truck, and she says to me, I know I said, now everyone's going to be asking you to help them move. And that's typically what happens when people have, because it's a pickup truck. And so I said, yeah, now everybody's going to be asking you to help them move. And she stopped and stared at me and she said, you know what? this is the first time, she said, I've always bought really big cars and really big trucks, but I've never gotten a pickup truck. And the reason why is because I always had to make sure that I had some place to either sleep in or pack my house up and move like right away. And I didn't really, and I, because I know her story, right? I know that she experienced a lot of abandonment. I know that she experienced a lot of housing insecurity, and I know she doesn't have a lot of supports historically, you know, as when she was growing up into her young adulthood. And so when she said, I've always purchased vehicles that I could make sure I could sleep in if I didn't have anywhere to, you know, to live, and that I could pack up all of my belongings without any, you know, without having to hire a truck or get anyone else's truck. This is the first time I've made a purchase based on what I wanted and what I needed. So my response to her was, that's progress. And she was kind of looking like, it's progress? I'm like, almost definitely. Instead of responding in the now to traumas that you experienced, you know, as a younger you, now you're in a position where housing is not an issue. You have friends and family around you. You're, you know, you're working and you're financially stable. So until now, you were operating out of old fears. You were operating out of response to old traumas. So the fact that you were, you know, made a decision based on your now or your today is significant, and it's definitely progress. And so I say that because I want to just kind of remind us to reflect on our choices and our behaviors or our decisions, and make sure that we're not responding now to things that traumatized us when we were younger. Because those things can be limiting, right? Those things can be can hold us in the same place and keep us from moving forward and progressing within our lives, within our goals, within our relationships. So just take a minute, you know, at some point to reflect and make sure that you're not responding based, you know, you're not giving a trauma response based on something that you don't have to, that's not impacting you that way anymore.
That's good. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I didn't know that I had a moment like that. Um, there's been a couple of times where I've noticed, mine is financial. There's been a couple of times where I've noticed that I'll get a lot of worry around, you know how you're about to be at the end of something like toothpaste or tissue or something, and I'll start to get anxious about having to go buy it because when I left for college and it was growing up in that time, I didn't have like, the finances to really continuously buy everything I needed. And so then when it's time to buy toiletries or things that aren't necessarily needed for me, or like food, I'll get real anxious about having to go buy it and I'll try and stretch it real, real long, even though I don't necessarily have to. I could just go buy it now because I have more of a stable job. So I've noticed that that's something that I need to like really think about, why am I getting so scared to go to the store and buy tissue or to buy more food when I ran out, or I'll get mad at somebody eating the last of it or using the last of it because I'm like, we're not gonna have any more to buy anymore. So that's something that I can um understand, I guess is the word I want.
You're muted, Nikki.
I was wondering if I had lost the call because I'm in the car, and so I was like, I don't hear anything. Did the call drop?
Now I was
Thank
wondering
you.
the same thing. I was like, what in the
So,
world is going on?
talk about
I was doing a whole
uncomfortable
lot of
pause.
talking. I was doing a whole lot of talking.
Yes, you were.
Thank you for letting me know. I was just saying another one that I have recognized in practice is in practice as a clinician and in practice as an educator is food insecurities. And so I'll see you know, young children and even, adults in practice who have, certain particular behaviors related to food, like people about their leftovers or, taking food with them or always having snacks around them or hiding food. Is related to trauma when they didn't know where their next or was insecure about where their next meal would come from. So things like that, things like Diamond had mentioned, um, being anxious about necessities. We kind of saw that with COVID when toilet paper was gone. And even going into the store, I remember going into the store the first couple of weeks of COVID, um, when we finally, were able to go to the store and the shelves being bare. Like I can recall that being a moment when I was like, oh my goodness. And I will admit that I overbought food. Like I still have canned goods and condensed milk and things like that from 3 years ago. Because not only did I feel like I had to buy, as much of what I needed at the time, I also had to buy for the unknown. We may have no water. We may have no, we may not have any refrigeration. So, I got to prepare. So that trauma kind of still, that trauma response kind of still stays with me. And I have to remind myself in the store, we have enough toilet paper. Calm down. No, you don't need, 20 cans of red kidney beans. It's going to be okay. So again, I just want to bring that up so you guys can just kind of reflect on any behaviors or choices that you're making now, that we need to work on releasing. That's part of the healing from trauma, is releasing those behaviors related to that trauma.
I definitely too was overstocking. Up
Mm-hmm.
here we have ShopRite. ShopRite has a can sale. I must have had 60, 70 cans of Progressive soup, 60, 70 cans of tuna, and we still ain't finished with it. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, yo. So it took a minute. It took a minute. And it was like, okay, don't get anything else. But, and it just made sense. Because like you said, shelves were bare. It wasn't the normal.
Mm-hmm.
Food didn't seem as plentiful.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's only, I guess it's just human nature to try to prepare.
For the unknown.
Yeah, and it definitely went a little bit over the line. Yeah, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. But what I also was gonna say was as for childhood trauma for me, it was as a teenager, I was over trusting and I used to give a mom to throw parties, so I got parties in the summertime,
Mm-hmm.
and then eventually my apartment got robbed, and the trauma of it was to find out it was actually the people who I thought was my friends.
Mm.
So it changed. It changed how I trusted. It changed how I looked at people. Like I didn't even hang out in my neighborhood no more because it was not only did I find out about it, but I found out about it too late. Because then it was kind of like a mixed thing. It was like, oh, okay. So it was people who I thought was my friends that did it. And then even further, the people who knew about it were also my friends, but waited till those people moved away to say, hey, so and so and so and so who did it. And I was like, wow, so you're not my friend either. Because
Mm-hmm.
that. So yeah. That's probably where I started not being on my block, started expanding my range of where I was at. Almost never seen on the block anymore, didn't really holler at the people anymore. Just kept it moving. Like, oh, this area ain't for me. I gotta move on. But I
Mm-hmm.
definitely was affected. I'm still guarded about who I let in my house and stuff like that now. But I feel like but I kind of choked it up for life lessons. I was felt like maybe I was just over trusting and not
Mm-hmm.
paying attention.
Yeah, definitely a good example when we're talking about trust issues and people who have, um, betrayed us or hurt us or taken advantage of us. Um, and the closer that person is to you, the more traumatic it becomes. right?
Mhm.
So it definitely can lead into, um, trust issues into adulthood that people might be still, still experiencing today. And I think that's one of the significant things about the childhood trauma piece is that a lot of people, whether they've been able to process their trauma from their childhood or not, are still kind of living out um, all of those, living out their trauma through their behaviors and their choices and within their relationships, which is the importance of talking about it and processing it and getting the support so you can it kind of shines a light on, oh, that's why I did that. All the way down to why people might be, you know, controlling people, why people might be have issues with trust, or why people might be have issues with boundaries, or any number of things that we play out as adults can be linked back to traumas that we've experienced over our lifetime. And then the other important thing to remember is the physical impact. You know, People that experience trauma, adverse trauma through childhood, are more likely to have high blood pressure, diabetes, develop cancers, things of that nature. Those serious illnesses can be directly linked to elevated exposure to trauma within childhood. So just being aware of that and processing through that and getting any of the necessary support you need, as well as um, being extra vigilant or extra focused on your self care is going to be important. I guess the last thing I would add is to make sure, or is the understanding that, trauma looks different for different people and different things are considered trauma. Like I said, trauma is personal. And so I always and I guess to be considerate of that with others. Like try not to, and when you're supporting other people, try not to compare traumas, right? Try not to say things like I can't believe, or that impacted you that way, or you still upset about that. Those are things that are of no value and no support to that person. It's you're much better place to support if you validate their trauma, whether you understand it or not, whether you feel it would have been traumatic to you or not. Validate their trauma, support them with no judgment for whatever responses they're experiencing, and allow them that freedom or that safe space to talk about it and feel those emotions.
Also seeing examples of negative responses to trauma. Working here at the hospital, uh, I was sitting at a post, and it's a common thing that we have people work with metal detectors, and so we'll hold on to things that shouldn't really go into the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So the gentleman was collecting his item as he was coming back, and it happened to be a knife. It was a pretty decent sized knife too. So as I'm passing it back, so I'm kind of looking at him because he seemed to be a decent sized dude, 6 foot, and I guess he saw the look on my face and said, "Yeah, I've been robbed 3 times." And I was like, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, I've been robbed. I've been robbed by a white guy. I've been robbed by a black guy. I've been robbed by a Spanish guy." And he just was like, "It's not gonna happen to me again." I was like, The thought I was having was, "Yeah, maybe you need to think about what it is that you're doing, that you look like a target for so many different people."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, and as he walked out, I was like, "You need to deal with your trauma, bro." And it was another, my colleague was sitting next to me. I was like, "Yeah, that's the person who's gonna go out there. They're either gonna go too far, or they're gonna get themselves hurt." I was like, all because of how he's choosing to deal with what happened to him in the past. It's like that's to me, that was definitely an example of a negative response to trauma. Because ultimately, I'm just waiting to see his face in the newspaper.
And that speaks to the hypervigilance that I've spoken of.
Right.
So he's on the defensive. I'm imagining he's on the defensive, and kind of anyone can get it. Everyone's an enemy. Which can be a setup for to invite aggression. He could, he could be him or anyone else that experienced like violent trauma could be, overly aggressive in situations, overreact in situations just because of that hyper vigilance. Everyone's out to get me. I got to always be on defense. I'm gonna get them before they get me. Type of mentality is definitely, a behavior that we see with people who have experienced trauma, particularly violent trauma. Um, in what tends to be um, particularly violent environments. I mean, we have some people who will move from a metropolitan area and have difficulty readjusting to a more rural area because they don't have the constant, loud noises, sirens, gunshot fighting, um, and so in this calmer and quieter environment, they're still hyper vigilant. The hello is what do you want? What they trying to do? Are they about to get me? All of those, so the trauma can go from different environments. Those people typically have to learn how to put their defenses down, put their guard down, find a way to kind of release those trauma responses so that they can function within their new environment in a healthy way. Similar experiences for people who've been to prison. Does anyone have anything else they would like to add or any
I just
questions?
want to say thank you. That was very informative. I appreciate the topic and the thoroughness in which you covered it. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure. And just like with any other topic that we talk about, like that's just the tip of the iceberg. Right. So I want to always encourage you guys to, if you feel that trauma is something that you've experienced, I encourage you to do more research, find out more information about the reactions to trauma, find out more information about ways to heal with trauma, find out more information about different types of therapies that support people who have experienced trauma, find out more information about the ACEs that I explained, the adverse childhood experiences, which I think would, actually be a nice session for us to have on, sometime next year, where we can actually take that particular scale and you could get a score. So you can kind of get an idea of, okay, this is what I'm dealing with, and this is how high my ACE levels are, and that could explain a lot of things that have happened to you or impacted your behaviors as an adult. So with any topic that we discuss, I always encourage you to do more research, because what I bring here, like we don't have enough time in a session to discuss how detailed and how complex the different areas of mental health and mental health wellness are.
You may not have enough time to give us all of the details, but you do give us an awakening. You give us an aha moment, which make us research and look back into ourselves to see, okay, this may be something I really need to see. So yes, thank you very much for what you did.
You're very welcome. My pleasure. And you'll be able to find this on our website, and you'll also be able to find this on our YouTube channel. So be sure to visit that. Spread the word if there's anyone that wasn't able to be here today that know they would have wanted to be here or they might benefit from it. Direct them to lmfoutreach.org. As I said before, this is our last session of the year. So we will see you guys next year um, for our January session, and we'll give you more information about who's presenting and the topic the closer we get to that date.
Thank you so much. This was
Thank
amazing.
you. Thank you for everyone for coming and supporting us over this past year. I want everyone to have a happy holidays. Be safe.
Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry
Thank
Christmas.
you. Thank you to LMF. And we can donate, like if we want to donate to the cause.
Most definitely. You can reach out to either, well, I'm not going to say either. You can reach out to Lynn Lewis, or you can also donate on the website. There's a donate button as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Have a good day.
Take care.
Bye.